in the fact that Warren says, I view myself as one of those guys, want to be that kind of guy at the college level. I'm glad Georgia allows that, fosters that amongst its players. I think that's a pretty cool branding message there that Warren says that he likes about UGA. You can read more about this at DawgNation.com. Now, with that said, let me kind of shift gears here and talk about a different subject. There has been continued analysis of some of the stuff that Georgia defensive coordinator Dan Lanning said on Friday when he met with reporters for a pretty interesting press conference, and it kind of goes along with something we've been saying throughout the entirety of this offseason, that for the Georgia defense to be the kind of defense that puts Georgia on a more likely path towards a national championship. If the Georgia defense wants to be a part of the missing puzzle pieces for how Georgia gets that done, one of the things that we firmly believe here, and we talked about this yesterday, one of the things that we firmly believe is that Georgia's got to make more impactful negative plays. We gave you some stats yesterday from Sports Source Analytics about how much more frequently drives that include a tackle for a loss or a sack end up without any points being scored. And obviously, if you're keeping offenses from scoring points, you're increasing your chances of winning. We say that for as good as Georgia has been, and they have been good at limiting points, they've certainly been good at limiting yards, creating more negative plays that give you a chance to beat some of the better teams you play, like, for instance, LSU in the SEC Championship a year ago. We think there are more impactful, or as they're sometimes called, havoc rate type plays that the Georgia defense got to be able to find this season. Well, when Dan Lanning, the Georgia defensive coordinator, spoke on Friday, he went into a little bit more detail about how he thinks Georgia gets that done. And a phrase that he used a lot when he spoke with reporters is the notion of, hey, you've got to finish plays. You've got to, you've got to do that last little bit on every single play. You've got to finish. And Lanning was asked to explain himself a little bit more about what he means when he says finish, and I thought that Lanning gave a pretty good description of that. I wanted to play this as a way of setting us up for where we need to go. Here's Lanning on finishing the plays by the Georgia defense.
Football's such a unique sport. You can win 90% of the play, and if the last 10% of the play, wide receiver catches the ball, you didn't do your job. If you don't get to the quarterback, you might have a great pass rush move, but you don't finish on the quarterback, it doesn't matter. If you cover somebody perfectly or fit a gap perfectly, but you don't make the tackle or get the ball out, it doesn't matter. So the key to us is we're finishing 100% of the play. And even if we're behind in the first 80%, how we finish that play can really be the key to success.
And by the way, everything is going to be Zoom related for the next little bit when it comes to some of this media stuff, so audio quality won't always be perfect. Maybe that wasn't perfect audio quality, but you can still hear what Lanning has to say there about wanting to finish plays. And the reason why I bring all this up is because you better believe that folks outside the bubble of DawgNation, other analysts, other media types, other fans, other recruits that haven't made their decision yet for the class of 2021, how Georgia finishes on these plays, how Georgia works to, put its outside linebackers, defensive linemen, how it works to put those guys in a position to have more success is going to be paid attention to this upcoming season. Let me give you an example of this. Chuck Smith is a former very good player at Tennessee with the Vols, played for a long time in the NFL at the Atlanta Falcons. He's a personal coach now, teaching pass rush for guys in the front seven, outside linebackers, defensive linemen, everything else. Go back to a few months ago on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. He was on the show saying what he has seen from the Georgia defense and what he'd still like to see more of. So as Dan Lanning talks about, we got to finish plays better, part of the reason why I think that belief is out there among the Georgia coaches is because of something that Chuck Smith, who is a pass rushing expert, once said on our very program going back months ago. This is Chuck Smith with an idea of kind of maybe how the Georgia defense is viewed in addition to all the success that it's had.
Kirby ultimately is a DB-minded coach. So from what I see at Georgia, on third down, it would always be coverage. On third and long, a lot of times they would rush 3. They wouldn't rush 4. So to me, it has to also, you have to mind frame, the foundation of this team is coverage. I just think that when you see guys like Tyler Clark come there, who's a 4-star, when you see guys like Ledbetter, who's there from last year, you see Davin Bellamy, Lorenzo Carter, it's not a secret. You got to make it a culture. You have to teach. You can bring in the greatest athletes in the world. Georgia, you can bring in every 5-star. I don't care how fast they run. If you don't teach them skills and moves, they will forever be average. And that's what Georgia has right now, a group of average pass rushers, because it's not a culture. And the defensive line coach and the coordinators need to make it a priority.
Chuck will be the first to tell you that he grew up in Athens. This isn't an anti-UGA guy, even though he went to Tennessee. He's been a personal coach for many former Georgia players. They've kind of worked on making their way to the NFL. The message that he delivers there is not coming from an anti-UGA bent. If anything, Chuck's bias is just very much in favor of pass rush. He just really, really likes getting after quarterback. And the statement that he makes there, and this is months ago on DawgNation Daily, the notion that that the Georgia defense, the foundation of that defense is coverage, that it works to put the defensive backs in the best possible light that it can. I would say that the image is out there about the Georgia defense, maybe a bit as it heads towards 2020. And the job for Dan Lanning, the job for Trey Scott, the defensive line coach, the job for Glenn Schumann, working with those interior linebackers, the job for this group is to say that this is a place that linebackers and linemen flourish just as much as defensive backs do. And for a Georgia defense that's probably had a little bit of a drought when it comes to defensive linemen getting drafted in this league, and maybe a whole bunch of linebackers being drafted as high as you'd like to see them done, I think that's also part of the discussion for this upcoming year, that Georgia can finish more plays, impactful in the backfield with sacks and tackles for loss, not only giving UGA the best chance of winning a national championship, but putting more guys in the front end of the NFL draft so the next crop of elite linemen and linebackers also notice that success. I think that's a big part of what's on the line for UGA this fall. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We love our podcast audience. I think we've got some exciting things coming, podcast only here in the days ahead, and I can't wait to tell you more about that as we kind of get there. As we roll towards what's going to be a very fun season around here. And huge thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. ESOG is a solutions-based company when it comes to your waterproofing issues, your foundation issues. That's really important because, let's face it, a lot of times those things, water creeping in, horizontal cracks, really any kind of crack showing up on your foundation, they can create a little bit of anxiety for you, but you should know that help is just one phone call away. Engineered Solutions of Georgia provides that for you. 2 full-time engineers on staff. They're proud partners of UGA, makes them fun to do business with, so please don't put off what you know needs to be done. The good news is it may end up not quite being as substantial a fix as you think it might be. Sometimes that's the case. But the better news is for issues that do require immediate attention, smart people can do the work for you. As I said, 2 full-time engineers on staff puts Engineered Solutions of Georgia at the top of that list. Very easy to get in touch with. Simply give them a call. Easy number to remember. Dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, I have gotten a lot of reaction to some of the Zamir White audio we played yesterday, the video that Georgia shared on its Twitter account of White talking about his attempt to be a part of the great legacy of Georgia running backs, and in particular, what motivates him for the upcoming season. And this is something that I want to be able to share with you because, I say this all the time, and it's worth repeating. I think one of the mistakes that I make sometimes is I have a tendency to see players as a name on a sheet more so than a human being that has hopes and dreams and feelings. We just have a tendency to kind of depersonalize all players sometimes because of the fact that we're watching them on TV or we're seeing them from the stadium very, very, far away. But these are people that have real feelings. Even guys like Zamir White, who comes across as tough as anybody, when he speaks about his feelings, when he speaks about what motivates him for the upcoming season, those words carry a lot of weight. And the reaction to what White said via the UGA Twitter account at the beginning of this week about why it is that he wants to get his job done and have a chance to play for this upcoming season, it has been really moving for a lot of people. Let me give you a brief taste of what White said via UGA Twitter.
What pushes me is I don't want to be a failure. Where I'm from, there's not many people that make it out. Either there's like killings or shooting or like people just getting, so it's like hard to make it out there. So like I'm just blessed to be here. So that's why I work so hard.
He says, I don't want to be a failure. I want to make it out of my hometown, something that he says a lot of people haven't been able to do. And that's what his motivation is for the upcoming season. How can you not be moved by that? How can you not be, Zamir's already a huge fan favorite. Georgia fans already root hard for him. But if it's possible, when you hear him say something along those lines, it makes your root even harder for him, I would imagine, if that's even possible. And in kind of a weird way, it makes me think of something that Alabama coach Nick Saban said this week. Now, there's not a lot of moments here on our program where I say, hey, Nick Saban said something that I like. But Saban did say something that I liked this week. And when you hear, Zamir White say, listen, I feel blessed to be at Georgia because this is my opportunity to make of my life what I want it to be, to avoid the failure that I've seen other people near me that grew up near me maybe have befall them. This is my chance to not have that. It reminds me of something that Saban said this week about, the critics who, say that football coaches are selfish or administrators in college football are selfish, that it's just about money for them, that it's just about, lining their own pockets. And I thought that Saban gave a very forceful, rebuke of all of that. And in light of what Zamir just said there, I think the Saban words here are even more true. Let me give you a brief taste of this.
Everybody acts like, we want to play for the money. We want to play for the players. I want to play for the players. We have a lot of guys on our team that can create a lot of value for themselves by playing this season. We can create a lot of value, and these guys have worked very hard to try to create and accomplish something as a team. So, all those things to me are important to the players, and I want to play for the players. I know it's important to the fans. I love our fans. I love the way they support our team. They're part of our team. We want them to continue to be a part of our team in whatever way that they can. But this is really about providing an opportunity for the players if we can do it in a safe way.
I think that Nick Saban is very articulate there, and I think he's right on target with the message that he gives. And listen, when it comes to like the virus that's hanging over the head of this entire discussion, I've never pretended to be a medical expert. I have no idea what the healthiest and safest choices are, and I would never try to fool you by making myself have to be more intelligent on stuff like that than I am. But I'm also not going to apologize for my belief that college football is an essential activity, that it has a powerful, powerful impact on the players who play it, and yes, even the coaches that coach it, and it deserves to be fought for. And for someone like Saban who steps up and fights on behalf of his players there, and for the folks at Georgia and the rest of the SEC have kind of done that, I think they're on the winning side on this, and I think they're on the right side. I think that history will remember them for that. So good stuff from Zamir White for his motivation for why he wants to play. Great stuff from Saban on why guys like Zamir deserve a right to get out there and go out and do that. And just keep crossing your fingers we get a chance to see this upcoming fall. It's good to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Before we're done here today, I want to let you hear more from Dan Lanning, some interesting stuff that he said about new Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken, not giving a ton away, but at least some insight on what he thinks Monken brings to the table. We'll do that coming up. For now, though, on a Tuesday, let's talk to our buddy Connor Riley.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always fun on a Tuesday to have Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And, one of the things that will keep the conversation going with Connor is what we've talked about a lot already. I wrote about this at DawgNation.com on Sunday. We addressed it on Monday. This is a Georgia defense that has been very, very good, but I think in terms of trying to be the best team in the entire country, there's more this group can do. And I think most of that is with the impactful, tackles for loss, sacks, things like that. I think that's still a threshold this Georgia defense needs to cross. We'll find out what Connor feels about that. Connor, welcome to the program. We appreciate you being with us.
As always, it is a pleasure to be on with you, B.A.
So are you with me here that, and I'm saying this as a fan that wants the best for Georgia and kind of looks at what has been lacking that's kept Georgia from being number one team in the country. I look at a defense that has been very good at not giving up very many yards. Very good at not giving up very many points, especially when it's not been playing against other elite offenses. But I look at a team that could have been more impactful in the backfield, that could have created more tackles for loss, could have created more sacks, especially with the talent that seemingly is in this organization right now. And I do think, especially against a 10-game SEC schedule, for Georgia to be as good as it can be, as it probably needs to be, I do think you need to see more of that. And I took it as very comforting that Lanning seemingly talked a lot about that when he spoke to reporters on Friday. As someone that comes maybe from slightly more objective, analytical bent, what do you feel about that?
Yeah. So what we know about Georgia's defense is that they are great at not giving up big plays, and especially essentially once you get to that 40-yard line, Georgia's calling card is you're not going to move the ball anymore. But the lack of negative plays, what that kind of allows teams to do is it allows them to sort of put the Georgia offense in a disadvantageous field position situation where, they're starting a lot of drives inside the 20, 15, and 10-yard lines. And if you're creating more negative plays, such as sacks and tackles for loss, you are pushing the opposing offense further back, and that allows your starting offense to essentially get better field position. And what we know about field position is that it gives you better scoring opportunities. And Georgia's defense is going to be very, very good this year. I think we all believe that. But for Georgia's defense to be as good as we think it can be, it does, I think, need to have more of those negative, maybe not so much turnovers, because I do think they did a pretty decent job, especially later in the year, enforcing some of those turnovers. But, finishing, getting those sacks, getting those tackles for loss. You saw, I think, in that Auburn game, they were perhaps a little bit more aggressive in blitzing. Mm-hmm. And early in that game, Auburn was doing absolutely nothing. And I think the big reason that Georgia ended up winning that game that day was because of how disruptive that Georgia defense was.
And I think it's a really interesting comparison. I thought Auburn was a good team last year, but let's face it was a freshman quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Their running game was kind of erratic, if not non-existent at times. This was not a great offensive team. There's a big difference between, even on the road,
Mm-hmm.
going out there and shutting down an Auburn defense, which for the most part Georgia did. An Auburn offense, which for the most part Georgia did in pretty impressive fashion. But if you're facing an LSU, a truly great offense, there aren't that many truly great offenses that Georgia's ever going to have to face, but LSU was one of them a year ago. If you're not matching some of their explosive plays, and every great offense will have their share, if you're not matching their explosive plays with negative plays of your own, I would suggest, not to be overly simplistic, but I'd suggest you have very little chance of winning that game.
Right, and you look at Auburn, perhaps the team that had the best success against that LSU offense a year ago. Yes, they gave up over 500 yards and had a fair share of big plays given up. But the reason they were able to stay in that game and hang around is because, especially in the goal line areas, they were able to create negative plays, to get Joe Burrow on the ground, to hit Joe Burrow, to make goal line stands and have tackles for loss in the backfield. And if you're able to do that enough, that does sort of help your defense get off the field, even if you are giving up a few, 10 to 15-yard plays more often than you usually do.
Do you agree with what Chuck Smith, the former SEC star, Atlanta Falcon, said on our show months ago, the audio that I played here, that maybe this defense has been built as a way of highlighting defensive backs a little too much?
I don't know if highlighting defensive backs,
and that's
maybe,
that's my word, by the way.
But I do agree with what Chuck says, especially in the part that Kirby is a defensive back coach, and I think we look at the same issues that Georgia sort of had with the offense and the way Kirby has sort of come up and been raised as a coach under Nick Saban that way, and sort of that how he's offensively influenced. I think conversely, defensively, that's how he's been influenced. And you look at some of these Alabama teams in recent years, under Kirby Smart, except for I believe 2015, they were never this 40-sack, dominant pass rush team.
Yeah.
But once Jeremy Pruitt got in there, they did turn up the heat a little bit more as a pass rushing perspective and as a pass rushing team, and that has continued ever since, though, with obviously less success in the last couple of seasons. So I think with what we know about Kirby Smart, he's always been the don't give up big plays in the back end. Giving up big plays is a way to prevent other teams from scoring points and getting easy points. But when you have the offensive struggles that Georgia has had, I do think you need to ask your defense to play a little bit differently than perhaps you would want to. If Georgia's offense was as explosive as, not even LSU, but in Alabama, if they were in that top 15 range instead of where they were a season ago, we're not having this discussion about Georgia's sort of need to be a better pass rushing, more disruptive defense. But because the offense is what it is, Georgia does, I think, have to change how it plays a little bit defensively.
I thought the Zamir White video that Georgia shared on its Twitter account this week was just incredible. It's moving to hear White talk about, what football means to him and why he wants to, to have a great season this year. It's also really cool to know that he has an appreciation for the history at this position, the Todd Gurley's, the Nick Chubbs, the Sony Michel's, and it just, I think, recenters a discussion that's really important for this team this year, which is we don't know a ton about what the Georgia running game is going to look like. This is less certainty around the running back position than I think Georgia fans are used to, but the possibility of it being very good and having a running back that's just as big of a fan favorite as Sony and Nick ever were, Gurley ever was, that possibility is still out there. White was the nation's #1 back for the class of 2018. Urban Meyer has really heaped some praise on White going into the start of this season because he obviously remembered him as a recruit. White is another year removed from injury. There's a chance that maybe that best version of Zamir we thought we were going to see, we never see it, but there's a chance we still do, and there's a chance it happens this year. I think that Zamir is a fascinating player in this team for this upcoming season.
Even if we don't ever see that quote-unquote best version of Zamir White, where people were saying he was one of the best high school running backs people had seen since Adrian Peterson, even if he falls short of that aspect, he can still be an incredible player for Georgia this year. I think one of the things that separates White from even guys like Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Todd Gurley, etc., is the there is a belief in Zamir White from both, I believe, the fans, the coaching staff, because of how hard you see him work, because you see him talking about how important lifting weights is, how important that part of the game is to him, because because of his backstory that he sort of touched on there, how important it is for him to make it as a football player, because that is his ticket out. To have all that, there's a belief there that Zamir White, if he can overcome 2 knee injuries and he can overcome the circumstances he grew up with, why can't he overcome the issues of playing in a COVID-shortened season and turning into that dominant running back that we all thought Georgia was getting when he committed back in June of 2017? 1,200 yards was sort of the number that got thrown out there as a benchmark this season. If he gets that in 10 games, that's hats off to him. That's a fantastic season.
Do you think 1,000 yards, by the way, I think we've talked about this. Eric Gray brought this up, the Tennessee running back. You think 1,000 yards is possible in a 10-game SEC-only schedule?
I do, especially with who Georgia finishes the season with. If he's at that 500, 600-yard mark at that 6-game schedule, or 6-game after those first 6 games, which I certainly think he could be, I think there's a real good chance with who Georgia plays those last 4 weeks that he could get to 1,000 yards.
It's really fun. The one thing I'm a big believer on is that the presence of Todd Monken, I think, will be a good thing for guys like White and the other Georgia running backs, not a negative. If it wasn't an offensive line coach like Matt Luke that I really trusted, maybe I would doubt Georgia's ability to remain physical the way they've been in the past. But Luke is a sharp guy. He clearly had an impact on the Sugar Bowl. Georgia played very well against a good Baylor defensive front. I think that Todd Monken, if he orchestrates the changes I believe are on the way for UGA, I think it's the running backs going to really benefit from that, because defenses aren't able to key on stopping them quite as much anymore.
The Cleveland Browns offense wasn't great last year, but Nick Chubb under Todd Monken, and again, Todd Monken wasn't calling plays, but he was designing that offense and did have a hand in it. Well, the Cleveland offense, and specifically the passing game, wasn't great. Nick Chubb was phenomenal last season. He was not the issue for the Cleveland Browns. And I've said this before, when you watch Zamir White play, I'm not saying he's Nick Chubb, but there are flashes of that physicality, that refusal to go down, that just keep churning. And he's a guy that Chubb gets better as the game goes on. And I think with how physical Zamir is, you saw it in the Sugar Bowl, over the course of the game, and with how Georgia in the past has wanted to play, I think that's going to play into Zamir being a better running back over 4 quarters than potentially some healthier and potentially better guys might be over 2 or 3.
I want to ask you about a couple issues, but let me just get one more thing in on Zamir before we move on. Are you also of the belief, the way that I am, that even though I have big expectations for Kendall Milton as a freshman and James Cook having a breakout year, and Kenny McIntosh's got no shortage of supporters, that the most pressure is still on Zamir to have the big year? Not saying that Georgia couldn't still have a competent running game even if there wasn't a Zamir White, but because of White's status, because he's the guy that probably has the the most experience here among these guys, that I would say that he has more on his shoulders than the other guys do, even though there's a chance a lot of these other running backs themselves could also be successful.
I think you agree that Zamir White has the potential to be the biggest difference maker among Georgia's running backs. And I
would
think
say so.
That's what they need from him to be this year. They don't, with the questions they have with the rest of the offense, Georgia needs Zamir White to be feared for opposing defenses to worry about him. And that's what they need from him more than I think anything else.
AP poll comes out yesterday. Georgia 4th in the AP poll. There's been a little bit of controversy around the other conferences being ranked, the ones that are not playing, Ohio State, the rest of the Big Ten, the Pac-12. Kirk Herbstreit says there's an asterisk next to this national champion. He said this on Nashville radio yesterday, just on the basis of so many other teams not playing. I don't believe in the idea of an asterisk. I will say that the AP poll was a little less fun for me, though, yesterday, because normally we're making these big national comparisons, and a lot of this just seemed really unimportant and nebulous because so many of these teams that were ranked are not playing. The AP poll coming out is generally a pretty fun day on my college football calendar. For the most part, I didn't really do much to even process this yesterday. What did you make of the preseason AP poll?
First of all, I just want to make sure Mike Griffith's not going to come jump all over me for saying I do sort of see what Kirk Herbstreit said when saying there is an asterisk, right? That's not happening, right?
Well, no, I think Mike's going to not come and jump on you. I think it's a valid opinion. I just don't happen to agree with it. Yeah.
Oh, roughly 40% of the teams aren't playing this season. Personally, I would have voted Ohio if I had a vote, and I don't. If I had a vote, I would have voted Ohio State the number 1 team in the country to start the season, in part because of the losses Clemson has have suffered at the wide receiver position. When you have that many teams not playing, and while yes, I do think it's not your traditional sort of title. Bill Simmons, for all the faults that he has, one of the ideas he came up with was to have an MVP trophy, but the MVP trophy, depending on the season, is a different size. I think this season, if you could shrink down the college football championship trophy a little bit, you probably should. Having said all that, I think whoever wins the national title this season will absolutely be a deserving champion. I agree with what Dabo Swinney said. They're still going to have to go through all the rigors that a team would have to go through. Is it a little bit less? Yes. Is there not, having to play a team like Ohio State, who I absolutely believe would have factored into the national title discussion? Yes. But at the end of the season, if Georgia goes 9-1 or 10-0 against an SEC-only schedule, they win the SEC championship game and they win a college football playoff, that's going to be as deserving as some of these past title teams as well. And they should absolutely still fly a banner without an asterisk on it.
So, before you even get to the national championship part of this, I feel pretty comfortable saying this may end up being the most deserving SEC champion of all time. Now, before you get to the national championship part of this, if you're playing 10 SEC opponents to even get to the conference championship game, eventually will have had played 11 SEC opponents before a college football playoff, then I think you can make a case that the SEC champion's the most deserving it's ever been. And that alone, I think, extends a degree of credibility to the college football playoff. The fact that we've never seen any team in any conference go through a rigorous schedule the way that we're going to see the eventual SEC champion. Now, someone's going to bound to win. So it doesn't mean that the winner necessarily, is anything more special than normal. But in terms of the validation of having played that many good opponents, I think there's something to be said for that.
The analogy I used a second ago about the national championship maybe being a little bit smaller, the SEC championship should absolutely be a little bit bigger because of having to go through that 10-game stretch. If you're Georgia, you have, and granted, yes, there are two extra opponents they got, Arkansas and Mississippi State. Georgia should absolutely beat. But they still have to go through Alabama. They still have to go through Auburn. They still have to go through a very good SEC schedule. And then if they get through those 10 games and they go 9-1, like I've predicted, like I think you think they go 10-0, even an 8-2, and then they win that SEC title, that's still a tremendous season, regardless of what comes next. But to get through, I think, a 10-game SEC slate and then get that SEC championship game, that's probably going to mean a little bit more this season than it definitely would in past seasons, and it means a lot in a lot of seasons.
And you listen, we can go around and around for days about what the Pac-12 is worth, what the Big Ten is worth. Frankly, different people feel different about that. The one thing I will say is that I would be very hesitant to call this a legitimate national championship, a national championship without an asterisk if, say, Clemson wasn't playing, because we've seen Clemson on the biggest stage win these championships and be a real factor in the national championship game. The fact that Clemson is playing, the fact that the SEC is playing, I feel like you can feel very comfortable that whoever the eventual national champion would have been is still the same champion this upcoming season. The absence of Ohio State alone is not enough to change my mind on that, because we have seen a little bit of Ohio State on the national stage. I would have voted Ohio State high if I had a vote and if we were deciding they were eligible for that vote. But it would be very different for me if Clemson wasn't playing, because we've seen Clemson beat and be the best of the best. Their presence, along with the SEC, is frankly, and I'm going to sound like Steve Spurrier here, but that's frankly about all I need for a legitimate national champion.
So your position switches if, say, the Big Ten is still playing, but the ACC is not.
I would say that the absence of Clemson, if a Clemson fan barked and said, y'all can't have a national championship this year because we're not playing, begrudgingly, I'd have to give that guy credit for that.
Even though the Big Ten is a better conference than the ACC.
Big Ten is a better conference overall, but the presence of Clemson has really mattered in the college football playoff. They have been hard to beat in the college football playoff. I take no great pleasure in saying that, but Clemson's been a very tough out in the college football playoff. And, you want to make an apples to oranges comparison here. The stature of Clemson as a program is higher than the stature of the Big Ten as a conference. The Big Ten overall is better than the ACC, but Clemson's brand nationally is bigger, more substantial than the brand of the Big Ten. Clemson's presence along with the SEC, I believe, validates college football playoff.
Fair enough. My opinion would have been the same if Clemson were playing and Ohio State were not. Or if Clemson were not playing and Ohio State were, but I certainly understand where you're coming from.
So I feel much better as a Georgia fan about recruiting right now. Just, one commitment can do a lot for you. I think that John Nugget Warren's a really good player, and I think we're going to learn more about his personality in the days to come. I think UGA fans are going to like that. Obviously, a huge part of this is the supposed weekend where guys like Corey Foreman and Mason Smith were on hand. There's been some photographic evidence of that. All of a sudden, all of this kind of falling into place and feeling like a typical Georgia recruiting cycle, it certainly seems more possible now than it may have seemed 72 hours ago.
I'm not going to say I told you so yet, But whenever signing day is, whenever Georgia finishes with a top 5, potentially top 3 class, I will say there were a lot of people that were worried about Georgia's recruiting, especially with happening in early July. Dallas Turner going to Alabama, Tony Grimes going to North Carolina. Kirby Smart is one of the best recruiters in the country. We've seen this time and time again. I get that they've missed on some of their top prospects. They miss on some of their top prospects every year. A year ago, Arik Gilbert, Noah Sewell. The names go on in every class. There are guys that Georgia just happens to miss on. That's the reality when you recruit the best players in the country. But with what Kirby has done with his staff, and yes, I think it's probably fair right now to say that moving on from James Coley has probably hurt your South Florida recruiting a little bit. But if Todd Monken gets the offense right, that goes away. I think that's going to open up a lot of doors for Georgia and its recruiting powers. And you factor in with what they have on defense, Dan Lanning, Glenn Schumann, Charlton Warren, that recruiting staff is top-notch, one of the best in the country. Georgia will, as long as Kirby Smart, I believe, is running things here at Georgia, Georgia will always be one of the best recruiting teams in the country.
Certainly it appears that it's heading that way again now, and we'll see. There's still a lot of hay to put in the barn here, and there's still some rumors of guys that you maybe feel like are a Georgia lean that could still be considering elsewhere, but a lot of fun stuff to watch coming up in the days ahead on that front. Connor, we appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yep, as always, it is a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so Georgia was 4th in the AP poll that came out. Let me give you a few of these AP poll spots, and then we'll talk about it just a little bit. Clemson, no surprise, they were 1. Controversially, Ohio State was 2, even though they're not playing the upcoming year. I don't think it's controversial where Ohio State is ranked. If you're ranking them, that's probably where you would rank them. They bring back a lot. They would have brought back a lot for this upcoming year. Bama at 3, Georgia at 4, Oklahoma at 5. That's higher than I'd put them. LSU's at 6, Penn State 7, Florida 8, Oregon at 9, Notre Dame at 10. A lot of these very, very, right on the button from what the coaches poll was, including Auburn at 11, A&M at 13. The one, I guess, SEC piece of news, and we had wondered yesterday if this might happen, and it did. Tennessee, that just missed out on the coaches poll, does make the AP poll. Coming in at number 25. I guess this is an example of Jeremy Pruitt fooling the media once again, much the same way he did with the brief hype of his number 1 recruiting class going back to the coronavirus lockdown back in March. So Pruitt has apparently fooled the media on this once again. I say half-kiddingly. But nonetheless, so Kirk Herbstreit goes on Nashville radio, and he says that because of these teams that are ranked that are not playing, you're going to have an asterisk for this upcoming season. I don't agree with that. I told Connor this before. I think Clemson's presence changes a lot of that for me because Clemson has validated itself on a national stage that Ohio State has not. I do believe that Ohio State was going to be a really good team this year. I have thought Ohio State was going to be a good team before, and in some cases I've been disappointed with the way the Buckeyes have played. What you think about a team going into the season, not the same thing about what the team proves about itself by the end of the season, and Clemson's just done a lot more of that. It's kind of a tired argument. I almost don't really care. I understand why the AP poll put these teams in the poll. I would not have done that. I think that's extending them a degree of grace that I don't think they deserve. I think the Big Ten has covered itself in shame. And I'm not quite so sure that Kevin Warren shouldn't just flat out lose his job. The idea that you throw this league a bone by having these teams ranked in the Associated Press poll so they can say, well, it would have been a great year for us and, have some sort of fodder to sell to recruits. Frankly, I'm not sure they deserve, that level of extension of grace. And as far as the Pac-12 teams that are ranked, I'm not even sure that folks the west of Mississippi even know the preseason Associated Press poll even came out yesterday. So I understand why they did it. I guess it'll give us some context in future years as to what we missed out on. And maybe it even provides a little bit of steam for if these teams do try to get together and play some games this upcoming winter or spring. I'm just saying I wouldn't have done it. It's being nicer to the Big Ten and the Pac-12 than I think those two leagues probably deserve. So that is that. Georgia at 4. That's probably about where most folks would have kind of expected Georgia to be on all of that. I shared some audio of Nick Saban a little earlier. I thought this was kind of funny, too, and this is just sort of a practical reality. I feel like I have pretty good hearing overall, but I can't really hear anyone when they're wearing a mask. Sometimes, at least it seems that way, nor do I feel like people can hear me. I end up feeling like I'm just shouting all the time. It's sort of like I don't know if this is true, but I heard this is true, that when they made the Batman movie with Bane, they had to go back and reshoot Bane's, I don't want to say lyrics, his lines, because with the mouth covered up, you couldn't hear what he was saying. And so I feel like I'm kind of the same way. Well, Nick Saban said he's dealing with the same kind of stuff, that he feels like he can't yell as much at practice anymore because people can't hear him. I'm sure the Alabama players are probably, fairly happy about that. And I'm guessing if Nick Saban feels that way, Kirby Smart, who is a very animated coach typically during practice, my guess is he's probably feeling that way too. I know he typically uses a microphone to kind of help amplify his voice so he doesn't have to yell quite so much. But does the microphone work if you've also got the mask over your face? I would say that's probably an issue that, a lot of folks are, probably kind of dealing with here. And I think that Nick Saban's just bringing up something real world when he says that. Update here, old friend of our program, Zach Albalverdi, who covers the Florida Gators, is reporting that Jacob Copeland and Kadarius Toney have decided they will play this upcoming year. You may remember these are two of the 4 players that had sat out the first day of practice. 2 of the 3 top receivers, I would say, all of which missed practice at the beginning of the year. Trevin Grimes also tweeted some stuff that makes it seem like he's going to play this year. And I guess now Toney and Copeland are on the way back as well. Now, listen, I'm a Gator hater. I like having fun at Florida's expense. This is no different. I've also said that if these guys had legitimate concerns with the coronavirus that made them want to sit out and not play, I'd support their decision to do that. Different people are going to arrive at different conclusions about the impact of what this virus is going to be on their lives or what it could be on their lives. And I think we got to make some room for people to just view this a little bit differently, and I'd be fine with them if they wanted to do that. However, what I think a coach has a right to do, even somebody like Dan Mullen, who for the most part I kind of view as a dingbat, but if I think you have a right to say, if you don't want to play, you don't have to play. But if you do play, I need you all in. I can't have you 1 foot in opting out and 1 foot in playing this upcoming season, because I think that's really bad for team chemistry. And the same thing too, if you wanted to sit out for some sort of ethical reason or conscientious reason, the way that some of the Pac-12 players had kind of threatened they might want to. If that's what you feel you need to do, then that's obviously your choice. College football is a voluntary activity. You can volunteer not to play. But if you're not playing, you're not playing. You can't have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I think that Dan Mullen has a right to ask that not be a part of his program. And frankly, I think if he was a stronger leader, I think stuff like that probably wouldn't be a part of his program. But according to a guy that would know, Toney and Copeland are on their way back. This is not a big deal for now, but it is to be filed away later. So for the class of 2023, one of the biggest recruiting stories that we probably had in quite some time is going to be the pursuit of Arch Manning. Arch Manning is the son of Cooper Manning, obviously the famous last name, but Manning's a legit prospect too. I think he's number 5, according to 24/7 Sports, number 5 overall prospect in America for the class of 2023. I think it's just the 24/7 ratings that are out for right now. But this is like a top 5 prospect nationally for the 2023 class. Obviously, Peyton Manning, Eli Manning are among the most famous guys to play football in recent years. And Arch Manning's recruitment is going to be a major, major recruiting story, both legitimately because he is a good player and also kind of symbolically because it'll be one of those things that gets the mainstream media more involved. And I guess there's some chatter coming out of Louisiana that maybe Georgia's a factor in this, that, a guy that's, close to Manning was on a radio interview, mentioned Georgia's one of the suitors there. Some of the aggregation, folks have kind of mentioned Georgia in this vein a little bit lately for Arch Manning. It's one of those things I think I'm going to want to talk to Jeff Sintel more about in the days to come, about, just how much is Georgia looking to be involved in Arch Manning's recruitment. I guess there's a thought that LSU's a real contender here. Ole Miss is obviously always going to be a big factor for the Manning family, but maybe some fun here with Georgia trying to get involved with Arch Manning for the class of 2023. That could be a good time in the days ahead, and for now, we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, let me get back to Dan Lanning here for a moment, and an interesting question that he was asked when he spoke to reporters on Friday about what he's learned thus far from Todd Monken, or maybe to say it better, what he's learned by observing Todd Monken going up against a Georgia defense and, kind of just the general chatter that coaches have with each other. They're able to talk, just given the social restrictions that are in place. And Lanning gave us a little bit of insight into what kind of he's seen from Monken thus far, and maybe what some Georgia fans will also get a chance to see once these games take place this upcoming September. Here is the Georgia defensive coordinator on the brand new Georgia offensive coordinator.
One thing I think that's unique about Todd, I'm not going to tell you what plays we're running, right? But what's really fun is he's the definition of a coach that's, he has obviously a lot of experience, knows exactly what he wants in his product. He's very demanding of his guys and what right execution looks like. But he's also very adaptable to change. The game's changed over the years, and I think you see a lot of pieces of that in his offensive game plan.
The thing that's really interesting from Lanning talking about Monken there, and I guess what it kind of brings to mind for me is, much the same way that I've said defensively, for Georgia to be as good as it can be, needs to be, you've got to be more impactful on defense to make that happen. Offensively, obviously, as someone who wants Georgia to win a national championship, I have said that, man, they've just got to find a way to be more explosive offensively. Find those big plays. If you want to sum up Georgia's pursuit of a national championship, very, very succinctly, it's explosive plays on offense, impactful negative plays on defense, finding a way to get more of those, and that's really the missing piece for what Georgia's provided. And I think that Monken coming in and changing certain aspects of the Georgia offense makes that more likely to happen, and I'm hopeful that he'll get free reign to do that. But in hearing Lanning talk there, it just kind of brings something to mind for me, that as Monken tries to orchestrate this change for UGA, I think there's also something to be said for the defensive expertise that's already in place at Georgia, really challenging Monken to make sure the ideas that he has really are set up to have the most likely chance of success. In other words, when he says, hey, here's the change I want to bring to the Georgia offense. I want to do this. I want to do that. Kirby Smart, who loves drawing up these defensive schemes on the chalkboard. Dan Lanning, who's no slouch at that himself. For them to say, well, now, are you sure, you're going to want to do this? Because if I'm an opposing defense, here's how I'm going to respond to that, which only pushes Monken to get better. The phrase iron sharpens iron is something we use for players all the time in great competition to see who the starter is. The starter is eventually made better if other good players were also in the mix for that. I think the same thing can be true for coaches there as well. Dan Monken, I believe, deserves some autonomy to make the changes he wants to make to the Georgia offense. But selling those changes to smart defensive minds, I think, makes the end result all that much better for UGA. So on the way out the door here, let me give a big shout out to Michael Barnett, former Georgia defensive lineman. Looks like he's going to get a chance with the New England Patriots. That's great to see, and obviously one of those stories we'll continue to follow. It's just a challenging year. I was talking to a guy that played in the NFL a few days ago, and I asked him, I said, what's it going to be like for these, non-draft free agents, for these guys that we typically would think of as being heroes of preseason games and stars during training camp. What's it going to be like for these guys making rosters this year, just given the way that coronavirus has impacted the NFL process leading up to the start of the season? And this guy, longtime NFL veteran, said, no bones about it, it's going to be much, much tougher for these guys. So the fact that Barnett's getting a shot here, I think, is really great news, and we'll continue to root for a lot of these guys, former UGA names, as they make their way towards the NFL. I'll also tell you this, Gator Hater Updater, how about this number, 1,396 days. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video. Time now for our RS Andrews Cooldown. Huge thanks to RS Andrews making it all possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust RS Andrews to do all of that for you. And if your air conditioning is going to go out, let's face it, the hottest weather of the year is still to come. Late August, going into September, sometimes even early October, it can be very, very hot. You know that. College football game day is typically very hot weather. So if you're going to be watching games from home this year and you want to do that in cool comfort, well, the way to make sure that you have the peace of mind that you know you will get to enjoy it that way is by getting your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find our friend at RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. All right, I started on Facebook yesterday. Let me start on YouTube here today. We'll get some comments, and then we'll keep it rolling on this very, very fun Tuesday here today. Jay Shipe said, did y'all see the new face mask shields? Yeah. So one of the Georgia players was asked about this. I forget which one. And he kind of, made it one of these things of, hey, you just got to do it. You can't complain about it. You just got to go play. And I understand the mental approach the players are trying to take to this of, you can't pretend that anything's a problem. You can't allow it to become a distraction. I think that's probably the right way to go about this. But honestly, if you're having to wear this thing that's so different than what you're used to wearing, that's got to be tough. And I'm not saying it's an impossibility. I'm not saying it's not the kind of thing that can be overcome, but it's got to be hard. I just would think that you're breathing, very much restricted. I'm imagining that's very difficult. So yeah, Jay, I have seen it, and it's obviously the same for everybody, I guess, but not an easy thing, I wouldn't say. Nature Gator weighing in today. Good to see him here. Huck Finn also trying to stir the pot as per usual. James Wade weighing in on those LSU defensive backs. I guess I saw where former LSU defensive back Grant Delpit went down with an injury. I hate to see that for him as he's getting ready to start his NFL career. Lance Freeman asked about James Cook. How big of a role do you think he'll see in the new Georgia offense? I'm hoping it's a very big role. We're going on the basis of photographic evidence here, but it certainly seems like Cook's been working hard over the course of the offseason. He was featured in a couple of the videos that Georgia shared. You don't want to read too much into that, but this feels like the kind of player that Todd Monken ought to be able to use. And I think one of the things about James Cook is that we kind of know probably what he already does well with, right? He's fast, he's quick, he can catch the football. I'm sure that Cook also wants to prove himself as a traditional tailback a bit too. So I think that's one of the reasons why he's probably looked to add strength over the course of this offseason. So, yeah, I mean, this is obviously a big year for Cook to prove, that he is the heir apparent to what his brother Dalvin did at Florida State and what, Dalvin has done in a Minnesota Vikings uniform. I would say that Cook feels a lot of motivation to go out there and get that done. And for Georgia, it's going to be a fact of life that not every elite prospect is going to pan out, right? And you can't avoid that. But you want to get the most out of the most guys that you can. I do think that Georgia has a responsibility this year. Currently Georgia's the only program in the country that can use James Cook. James Cook is not eligible for any other program to use. He is Georgia's to use or lose. And so getting the most out of James Cook this year, I think, is really important for a program like UGA. Noah Sheldon, Mad Dog 2020, predicting Florida to lose 5 games this upcoming season. It is a tough schedule. Tougher schedule than the Gators thought they'd be playing, and multiple losses, I think, is a real strong possibility. For instance, I have predicted that Texas A&M will beat Florida. I do believe that. James Wade says, imagine wearing N95 masks for 12 hours a day. The way that you have to, if you're going to wear them right, when you have to really, pull that cord and get them tight on your face, I don't believe I could do that. I'm amazed at how much my kids, for the most part, now these are just the regular cloth mask, but they've adapted to wearing the mask pretty well. It's almost kind of sad how easily compliant people can become. But they've, they're wearing the mask when they go outside for recess and things like that. And they've kind of just gotten used to it. Now, those masks are a lot easier to wear, but they're still children. So, yeah, I would not want to wear an N95 mask 12 hours a day. I would not. Cecil Sanders checking in from Alaska. Boy, Cecil, that's really cool. Hope you're enjoying that there. And thank you for being a part of DawgNation Daily today. We appreciate that. G. Grace says, I wear a mask, but I don't like it. And that's pretty much my philosophy on this, too. I'm not going to pretend that I enjoy wearing masks. I don't. But I wear one just to be nice, I guess. Michael Porter says, hopefully everything's okay for the season. Yeah, me too. Oh, boy, I hope that. All right, over here on Facebook for a moment. A few of your comments there. Steve Bond says he's working at a school in Florida and the kids are doing great with the mask. Yeah, it's really amazing. I would say that, I have young children, but they're doing really well with them thus far. Happy birthday to Randy Hall. Randy, hope you have a great birthday. Thanks for spending some of that birthday with us here today. Daniel Aldridge says the masks are hot. Yeah, boy, they really are. At least they are to me. I couldn't imagine wearing one exercising. Not that I'm, not that I'm out there running a marathon, but I just couldn't imagine doing that. Wayne Folan, I should have probably mentioned this during the regular show. Maybe I didn't. He says, how do the polls change when the season starts? Do the teams not playing continue to be ranked? No. The only time that the Big Ten, Pac-12 teams are going to be ranked, or I guess the other, others, Mountain West school. The only time was there a Mountain West school in the poll? I don't think there was. The only time they're going to be ranked is at the preseason poll. Once the games begin, the only teams that will be ranked are the teams that are playing. So you'll have major movement in the polls. Once the actual games begin, these teams were just given credit for the preseason poll. Joel Moody says, hopefully we get Cook to 30 catches, 20 touches in the return game to go with his carries. That's kind of a fun thing to think about. Dante Nixon says, I agree with you on this year's SEC champion. It's not going to be easy when you play an all SEC schedule, that's hard. Yeah, it is. I think I mentioned this to y'all the other day. I have no idea why I feel this way. Sorry, my nose is. I think there's a certain aspect of the SEC schedule that's going to kind of remind you of the NBA playoffs just a little bit, where it's like you see, and gamblers call this kind of a zigzag theory, where you use the Blazers and the Lakers for a moment. Blazers win game 1, Lakers come back and just I guess blitz them in game 2, and you kind of see this sometimes in the NBA playoffs. And for the people who follow that league for years, you kind of see a version of that a lot in the past, of the team that played poorly one game plays better the next game, and there's motivation, there's all kinds of stuff. It just kind of zigzags back and forth. I think you could see some zigzagging in the SEC this year, where even if a good team, it's not enough for them to lose a game, but you may see a team struggle one week and then come back and play much better the next week. And I just don't think you're going to see a huge level of across-the-board consistency. As I mentioned, I kind of botched these stats when I gave these on the air because it'd be kind of complicated, but in the last 3 years, we've seen 3 teams in each of those years win fewer than 3 games in the comp. But other than that, of the 14 teams, 11 of the 14 teams have won at least 3 conference games, right? So what that means is you've got a couple teams that are so bad they may lose to everybody. And it's possible to have one team good enough that it beats everybody. You've seen that the last 3 years. LSU beat them all in 2019. Alabama beat them all in 2018. And, so you kind of have, these moments where one really good team may sweep the board, one really bad team may get swept by everybody else. But other than that, around 10 or 11 of the rest of the SEC teams are going to be winning some games and losing some games. And so, much like the same way the NFL, the old commissioner Pete Rozell's goal of having every team in the league be 8-8, I think you're going to see a lot of gravitational pull towards the middle. 5-5, 6-4, 4-6. I think you're going to see a lot of just kind of movement towards the middle this year, where it's going to be very hard to tell what's an easy game and what's a hard game, because all of this is going to be dictated about games against only SEC competition. I think the evaluation process this year is going to be really, really different. And, I think you may see more examples of what we think of as good teams being pushed by what we don't think of as necessarily a very good team. I think you may see more examples of that just on the basis of it's just hard to play an SEC team week after week after week. Let's see what else. James Crum says, I might go to a game now since masks are being required. It's dependent on the ticket prices. And James, I'm kind of with you on this, at least the second half of your comment. I am really curious to see what happens to the secondary market with some of these tickets. There are people that are not going to want to go, but I would say given the low availability, there's only about 20,000 tickets available, less than that, I guess. Given the limited availability of these tickets, are we going to see these skyrocketed extreme prices for people trying to sell these in the secondary market? Greg McGarity, the Georgia athletic director, did say last week that this will be no different than any other year. Once you have the tickets, they are yours to do with whatever you want to. You can transfer them to somebody else. You can sell them to someone you've never met before. So the opportunity, even for Georgia fans that want to go on the road, I'm assuming is still going to be there. You want to go to Tuscaloosa, you're just going to pay to be there. What kind of prices will we see for that, just given how few tickets are actually available? That could be pretty amazing. Christopher Moore wants a squeaky voice Dan Mullen from me speaking on Florida. We'll see if we can bring that back at some point in time. I don't know if I've got the energy to do that today, but we'll see if we can bring that back at some point in time. That's funny that you remember that. Randy Hall says, what's your prediction on the production from our tight ends? I expect a big year from Trey McKitty, or at least a solid performance from Trey McKitty because he was used by Florida State. I'm still a big believer that a guy like John Fitzpatrick can have a real role on this team, though. I would feel the same way about Rylan Goede if you told me that Goede was healthy. I'm not sure right now if he is 100% healthy. He might be, but I have my suspicions that he might not be. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of guys on this Georgia roster who I think would have a chance to contribute there. Obviously, people want to see what Darnell Washington brings to the table, and Washington may be just as dazzling as a freshman as people think that he can be. But I think there's some other guys on this tight end group that can also play as well if given a shot. John Benton mentioning the CDC revising guidelines about asymptomatic people being tested. That seems like it's good news. I'm with you on that, John. I don't probably 100% understand all the implications of that, but it seems like it would be good news. Jermaine King says, I bought some cool masks that I don't mind wearing. I also have asthma, so I'm in that at-risk group. I have one that looks like the mouth of the Incredible Hulk. That is pretty cool. My wife also has asthma there as well, so we've kind of thought about that in our own home front too. And, there was the thing in the Washington Post the other day about those gator masks, not Gator, but Gaiter, that, those things you wear around your neck, pull over your face, being so thin that they didn't necessarily help. And this is not like, a mask thing. This is about this specific mask. I never really heard much more about that, though. Cecil Sanders predicts Florida goes 6-4 this year. So there you go. Good to see Stacy Goble in the comment section today. Tristan West says, I'm glad our offensive line has gotten better shape, but I pray they don't lose their strength and physicality. That's an important thing to pray for sure. He says physicality is going to be important on both sides of the ball. Is something you got something to say? Go ahead. Connor Riley going to join us. Pitch voice. Oh, yeah, we got a couple guys miss practice. There you go. For somebody who wanted to hear that before. It's almost like you can't recreate the original anyway, so you get a chance to enjoy the Dan Mullen right there. Well, good job, Connor Riley. Really good job. But as I think it was Tristan was saying, I do think that in the transition to a Todd Monken, you've got to be careful that you don't make a deal with the devil here, and I say that figuratively, that you don't, get more explosive on offense at the expense of also being physical, because I think eventually you'll be unhappy that you made that trade. I think you've got to try to find a way to be more explosive offensively, ignite the passing game a bit more while also maintaining some of that physicality on both sides of the ball. That's really been the hallmark under Kirby Smart. I think you're right to bring that up. Green Soldier says, if UGA wins the East 4 times in a row, is that a first for the entirety of the SEC? Green, it pains me to say that it has been done once before. Florida did that in the mid-'90s under Steve Spurrier, but all the more reason for Georgia to do that this year to match that feat by those lousy, stinking Gators. So winning it 4 years in a row is just a step towards winning it 5 years in a row, which has never been done by anybody in the SEC. So, yes, sir. Green Soldier, Georgia has something to play for in that regard, matching what the Spurrier Gators did in the 90s and then eventually surpassing them next year. Stacy Goble says, why is Florida so overrated? They are terrible. Stacy's a guy after my own heart with that, for sure. I appreciate Stacy weighing in on that. SEC Dog also has Florida at 5-5. He says Dan Mullet takes enough garbage to stay there for a few more years. Talks enough garbage to stay there for a few more years. It'll be interesting. It'll be very, very interesting. Let's see what else is going on here. Keith Fold says about that streak of SEC East to match it this year and break it next year. I like the idea of that, and that's also a good way for us to keep it. On the show here today, by the way, as we get ready to go on the door, make sure that you check in on AJC. Get your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Keep up with everything going on in your world. Kroger doing some great work to benefit some nonprofits for some Atlanta students. This is really good stuff. A really good job by Kroger. You can read more about that at AJC.com. Also, Falcons continuing to go through their preseason ahead of the start of the NFL campaign. You can read all about that at AJC.com there as well. And a bunch more stuff going on, including a virtual book festival and everything else. Keep up with all your Atlanta news now online at AJC.com. It's Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Big thanks to RS Andrews, making the RS Andrews Cooldown possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust RS Andrews to do all of that for you. We certainly trust them around here to do all that for us. You just got to find them online at rsandrews.com. You have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.